Hello and welcome. Thank you all for joining us for another Microsoft Reactor live stream event from wherever you're coming from. Whether it's morning, afternoon, or evening for you, we appreciate you tuning in. We are happy to have Lisa Cohen, a Principal Data Scientist Manager from Microsoft, joining us today to kick off their four-part monthly series focused on personal and business development. Today, Lisa will discuss professional networking for people who hate networking, like many of us do. So this will be great, hopefully, and you'll gain a lot of insight. This session will run for approximately 60 minutes with time for questions throughout and additional time at the end. If this is your first time joining us, please note that for our Teams live session, there is a 30-second delay from speaker to audience, so definitely feel free to post questions in the chat as they come up, but just be aware that you may not receive a response straight away. A recording of this session will be uploaded to our YouTube channel as well. At the conclusion of this session, I will share a link to our feedback survey. The Reactor program is always striving to provide new and engaging content, so your feedback really helps us to curate those topics better. Please, if you have the opportunity, do fill that out. At this time, I will hand over the floor to Lisa to begin. Thank you very much, and thank you, Lisa, for joining us and taking the time out.
Great, thanks for kicking us off here, Rebecca, and thanks everybody for joining today. So I'm looking forward to discussing this topic with you all that is not a topic that, we always get excited about, but really what I hope to do is to reframe that for us today and help us think about ways that we can consider this in other contexts and make it more enjoyable and exciting. So I'll kick off with a quick intro just to give you a sense of perhaps some of the networking scenarios that I've been in. So my background was in math and applied sciences. That was the focus of my bachelor and master's degrees. When I first joined Microsoft, that was about 16 years ago, I was working on Visual Studio, and I had a few different roles in that group, working on the languages, the IDE, and then looking at the product feedback and telemetry and our product and business analytics. And then I moved to Azure 5 or 6 years ago, leading the current data science team in the organization that I'm in today, which is the Microsoft Cloud Data Sciences Group. And our charter is to help customers succeed on the cloud. We are a cross-functional team, including data scientists. We run experiments, machine learning, AI services and production, data visualization, and PMs. And I like to stay active in the community, so we typically host different student projects. Recently, I joined the UW Data Science Board, and I just enjoy, speaking about different data science and career topics, such as the one today. So thanks for joining us here, and here are a couple links where you can stay in touch in the future. So let's get into our topic for today, and the way I've structured it is first we're going to discuss a few misconceptions about networking. We'll recap who is in our network. Then we'll discuss some networking opportunities and include a focus about the work from home environment currently during the pandemic and some modifications there. Then some various tips about how to approach these networking scenarios. And finally, a discussion based on a book that also discusses the difference between introverts and extroverts and how we can approach networking from both of those standpoints. So I like this article from HBR about networking because it seems to get right into the crux of some of the issues. So the first one is this feeling that networking is mostly a waste of time. I know I've had this feeling about it. There's some types of activities that we do where we know it's kind of a linear relationship. There's some kind of relationship there with the amount of time you put in on the results that you get back. And networking, I would say it's positively correlated in that way, but it's not necessarily consistent. Like one event you might go to and it might be very productive, or another context, maybe you didn't have as great a connection. So it's kind of like shopping in that sense. Sometimes you don't know when you go out, what the inventory is going to be and what you're going to find. And so sometimes it's a hit and sometimes perhaps not. So I think that's one aspect around the time investment, just not knowing going in what you're going to get out of it. But we'll kind of reframe that and see what are some useful aspects of that discovery along the way. This other misconception is that people are either naturally gifted at networking or not. So that comes up in the introvert extrovert discussion, for example. This feeling that it kind of comes naturally to some versus others. And so we'll kind of talk about how there's different styles of networking, and that can build some confidence around being able to approach it from different personalities and tendencies. Next, this feeling that relationships should form naturally. So sometimes networking feels somewhat contrived, and that gets into the next point also about it feeling more self-serving or selfish. And so we'll talk about some environment, some natural constructs where you can engage in networking, and then also some ways to reframe those engagements so that they don't have to feel so self-serving. And then finally, this last one around this idea that, hey, we already know who we should be engaging with. Those are the people that we're engaging with more frequently today. So, why do I go and invest time with, these various contacts outside of that bubble? And that's also one of the values we'll see of networking, is that we might feel like we think we know what are all the areas we should know about or be invested in, but networking can really broaden our horizons and perhaps show us an area that is valuable for us to dive into, but we didn't know it first. So one place I like to start is just reflecting on who is in our current network today. And one reason for this is because I think that we often feel like networking is, going to that extra event. And what I'd like us to consider is, what are all of those current interactions that we have in our life already, where we can take more of a networking approach, have these open discussions, learn more from others. And so it doesn't always need to take so much extra time to do this. And so I think that can be helpful for people who are, navigating work-life balance and demands during pandemic, and just thinking around, what are the activities I'm already doing today and how can I do more networking there? So in terms of who is in your network, you could think about your current coworkers, and that could be, in your immediate team, or if you kind of think about the various circles beyond that, the broader organization. Prior coworkers, I think, are a fantastic network. These are folks that you worked with deeply in a team. They really know you, and you've gotten to engage and partner together on projects. And now perhaps they're in a different team or a different organization, and so it can, be really quick to start up a conversation, and you can learn a lot about where they're focused today. And then, there's a variety of organizations, leagues, communities, groups that we might be involved in, either professionally or outside of work. Any of those contacts, I think, give us insight into, broader scenarios. And then former classmates and instructors, I think, kind of similar to the prior coworkers, these folks are all in different places now, and you've had that shared experience in the past. And so that's a great network to be able to go to and find out more about the field that they're in or the discipline that they're working in, and perhaps get some tips for your approach there too. Friends, neighbors, family. So yeah, one just example, this was pre-pandemic, but I remember being at a kid's birthday party, and I was just sitting around while we were there anyway, chatting with one of the other people there, and they happened to be a Microsoft partner. And anyway, it led to this whole interesting discussion around the offers that we're providing and some areas that I was working on as well. And so it was just an example of like, hey, you can learn about these things, have these type of networking interactions wherever you are, and sometimes when you least expect it. So then when we think about building on that, as far as what are the opportunities for networking, I have updated this as I thought about how things have, what has stayed the same and how things have changed during the pandemic. So, there is I find there is a little bit less of the just spontaneous run-ins. So I've seen some articles that some buildings are actually designed with the kitchens and the restrooms centrally so that people would have these fortuitous run-ins and it would create more collaboration and engagement. We don't have all of those interactions today. I play on a sports team at work. That league got canceled. So there's some things that are not quite available as they used to be. There's others that are modified. So, some social events that you might have done in the past perhaps are available now on Teams or Zoom or other online meetings. Another one I would throw out there that I think we don't always consider today is that before and after meeting time. That has always been really valuable for networking in the in-person meetings. And I do find that you can still do that online. You have to kind of get yourself to do it. But, often as you're waiting for people to join the meeting, there's a little bit of dead time, and you can fill that by just reaching out or connecting with others on the call, even just some kind of casual conversation. And I know sometimes people feel like the small talk or the outside of work talk might not be relevant for the work topics. However, I do think there's this whole topic around communication and just how do you have good connections and just interpreting communication the same way from different contexts. And I think when you have a little bit more context about a person outside of the specific work subject you're discussing, you do things like give each other the benefit of the doubt. You can understand better what they're trying to refer to. Perhaps they're more willing to want to reach out and help you in some different scenarios. So I think that is valuable as well for the work topics that you're discussing too. Some conferences have moved online, and there's all different types of breakout rooms. I even attended one event where there was a virtual reality experience, so you could it was with Allspace VR. You could simulate that experience of walking through a conference. So we're obviously trying, whatever we can to simulate as much of this as we can. But I would say, if you do get opportunities once this is all through to go back to some of the in-person events, once you're there, it's funny. Sometimes I find that, even people who I work with, I actually used to engage with them more in other cities when we were traveling for events, because I think sometimes at work your schedule gets so full from the back-to-back meetings and other commitments, and when you go out to a work trip, everybody needs to have meals at different times. So I think just leveraging some of those times that you're already out there to connect with people in perhaps a more relaxed environment can be helpful as well. I also encourage just thinking about things like trainings and brown bags, volunteering. These are opportunities where you have an interesting intersection of the community. And so there might be different people from different parts of your organization or from other organizations who are there attending. And so I think, obviously you're there for the topic of the event, but just thinking about, hey, as long as you're there, how can you talk to the person next to you? Or if it's online, perhaps there's a chat and you really like some of the questions someone was asking, you can go ahead and write them one-on-one, which I think then I'll move into these one-on-one, the mentoring, things like book clubs. So these are a couple areas that are available and I think have actually been pretty interesting during the pandemic. I find that I'm involved in quite a bit of mentoring as both a mentor and a mentee. And at first, I think there was a bit of a question of, hey, should we just put these on hold and wait till we get back in person? And then, once it was clear that this was going to be going on for quite some time, then we did go ahead and keep those going. And I think they've been really valuable during this time. I think that, on the one hand, and I'll get to the next slide. On the one hand, there's kind of this dichotomy that people do feel like there's a lot of online meetings and a lot of things are harder than they used to be otherwise. And so on the one hand, we're all very busy, but on the other hand, we're also isolated. And I feel like there is this sense of longing for social connection. And so I think just finding the right balance. You don't need to fill your calendar to the point that it's overwhelming to you, that you're not going to have good experiences if you do that anyway. So, but I think including a few here and there is really valuable. And so what I found with the mentoring is that, and I'm also involved in things called mentoring rings, where you get a group of perhaps 12 people together with 2 mentors. And it was really helpful to have this community, I think, coming together during this time. There's just different, just like before pandemic, there were various topics to discuss that people are working through. I think pandemic just brings a whole set of additional ones as well. And so I find it's relevant. It's, it's nice to do things in person and have that connection, but I think we've gotten a lot of the value out of the online meetings as well. So definitely encourage those. The other one I had on the last slide was a book club. That's something that I lead in our group too, and that has been able to continue very well during pandemic. I find a lot of us are reading more in different times with different schedules these days, and so that's a nice way just to continue learning or researching topics that you're interested in, and do it in a shared way with others. And yeah, I find that book clubs really get to a different pane of connection within an organization. So would encourage anyone who's interested to get involved in those, to kick them off. They're pretty easy to organize. And I have a post on my LinkedIn if you're interested in more information about just how to set that up. Great. So I guess the other thing I was just going to mention, so I mentioned, one of the challenges, the missing body language. So, we do have to piece together a little bit more of that context to fill in that 3-dimensional person. But yeah, on the other hand, I would say, if we want to focus on some of the silver linings, I do find that, while I did used to enjoy some of the spontaneity of the other events and being able to kind of move from one conversation to the next, there is something about the fact that now we have to be more intentional. You set up a one-on-one discussion, and I've gone ahead and reached out to people and said, hey, I'd love to learn more about this, or it looks like we're going to be working together more. I'd love to, connect and just get to know each other as we kick off this partnership. So I think there's plenty of folks that I've actually newly worked with during this time. And I find that act of setting up that one-on-one meeting actually can lead to a deeper conversation, perhaps than if you're at a larger event and you're kind of having a 5-minute chat here and people are drifting around. So perhaps that's a silver lining. And I think when we get to the introvert versus extrovert styles, there's often this mentality that, extroverts speak more and get more energy from being with others. So they would be more aligned with being good at networking. But I think these kind of deeper and smaller group conversations really lend themselves for the introvert style as well. So I think it does level the playing field there in a way. All right, and yeah, lastly, we'll talk next about how to kick off these networking conversations. There's kind of no end of topics this year in terms of ways that things have changed and new things to discuss. But even just something as simple as, have there been any new hobbies that you've picked up during the pandemic, can be a way to break the ice and perhaps find some common ground with the person that you're meeting with. Because I often find when you ask those open-ended questions, you might not know that you have much in common with this person, but bit by bit you'll start to find some things that you do relate to, and then that can really help it lend its way to making the whole process more enjoyable, because then you're talking about something you enjoy. It doesn't feel so forced. You can connect about that. So then building on that, as far as the networking tips, here's a number of different aspects to consider. So the first one I call this building a heat map. So regarding that first myth about networking, that it can be a waste of time and our strongest connections are the most valuable. So perhaps you could reflect on, what are some areas that I would like to learn more about for my career or professional development or my interests. So some examples would be, let's say you're considering another discipline, for example, and you want to learn more about that. So you could put that on your list. Perhaps there's another technology or a different part of the business. Those could all be areas that you want to learn more about. And then I think when you're thinking about who to set up those one-on-one meetings for, or if you're going to the networking event pre-COVID or some way online, you could prioritize a bit who you engage with. And so maybe that would make it so it doesn't feel so open-ended that I have no idea what I'm going to get out of this engagement. You have a sense that, hey, here are some areas that I'd like to explore further, and you're going to get to discuss those more with somebody through this interaction. So that's a bit about joining events with a purpose. And there's a balance here, because I mentioned that we do want to use these networking opportunities to learn what we don't know that we don't know. However, this can be a way to ease into that and keep it a little bit more structured. I think balancing those two goals. We talked about broadening our perspective. I like this concept of just having your eyes open to luck. I think sometimes, we can just feel like, oh, it's lucky that this happened, or this person's lucky. But I think that, there's opportunities that are passing us by all the time. And if we can be open to them and see them and recognize them, then we'll find them. And so if you're opening these networking conversations, putting yourselves in these environments, you'll end up meeting people that end up being, really amazing connections and lead to unexpected and great things as well. Yeah, and then the next one, I think, sometimes we really hesitate on wanting to reach out to someone, for example, ask them to meet or to connect. I'd say, human nature, we do have this tendency to want to help. So I think sometimes we don't need to be so guarded on that. It's kind of that mentality of, what's the worst that can happen? So I think, just going ahead and putting yourself out there, I think most people actually will accept that connection and opportunity to meet. And even if a couple don't, look at all of that you've gained by doing that. Paying it forward. So this, for example, comes in the case of networking or mentoring or helping others. So, if you ask someone if they could tell you more about product management, there'll be some time when they'll probably come to you about something else that you're interested in or would like a connection to. So yeah, finding ways that you can help others as well. This next topic is about just the nerves. Sometimes I think going into these conversations, I think with the whole topic around, some people are better at networking than not, or the hating networking. I think it can be challenging sometimes to kick off these conversations with different types of individuals. So a few things I put in there. Amy Cuddy has this research around power poses that you could do to help with confidence before a discussion. Exercise, anything where you can kind of get that nervous energy out, find different ways to relax. Having an elevator pitch, just something to kick off the conversation so that at least you have something that you don't want the whole thing to be rehearsed and practiced, but something just to get the conversation flowing, and then you'll be fine from there. Visualizing is another one that I'll add there. So sometimes if we take a few moments just to kind of think through what that meeting or interaction is going to look like, then there's a few less surprises because we've already thought through some of those scenarios, and that can help us feel more comfortable. We talked about finding common ground. I think that can be a way to feel more natural as we're engaging with others, as there are common topics and interests. Current events can be an icebreaker. We talked about the pandemic hobbies as an example there. Perhaps not politics or religion is your first question to ask someone, but open-ended questions, things that don't result in a yes or no, are good ways to, just put something out there and see, see where folks, what you learn as you listen there. yeah, listening is a big part of this. I think as you're out there doing the networking to learn from others. Yeah, there was a quote just this last week from the interviewer about, you never learn anything from talking. And so, making sure to listen from those interactions is key. So building trust, this is, finding ways, I think building on that common ground and, building a connection, positive self-talk. So we'll discuss this book afterwards, but the author gives an example where she went to a networking event and she introduced herself. And when she introduced herself, she actually read the name tag of the person who she was meeting. And so, I think there's a few different ways to react from that. She could have, gone in her head and told her, how bad that was, or whatnot, and really gotten herself down. Or she could just have a sense of humor with it, as she did. And then it became a positive because that person remembered her and they joked about it later. So I think like turning the lemons into lemonade in those cases is great. And yeah, generally a sense of humor just, helps with navigating a situation. Let me take a moment and just check for any questions here in the chat. And I'll just share a reminder too to go ahead and add those in as we're going through the content. So I'm happy to address some of those along the way, and then we'll have another opportunity at the end. So I see, let's see, a few that have come in here. Yeah, one was about what to do if the other person is talking a lot. That for an introvert, if you're listening more and the other person's essentially dominating the conversation. And yeah, I mentioned that, obviously a lot of the goal is listening, but yeah, I can see where this comment is going, that at some point that could go too far. I think if you need to kind of lead in, I think one technique that I've used is sometimes comes up in interviews as well, where someone might be kind of going on and you actually want to cover other topics. So I think, kind of leaning in and kind of finding a way to insert yourself and say, hey, I'd love to also hear more, or learn more about how you approach X, or how, I think the question might be like, how do you navigate that conversation so that you can cover the topics that you would like to. So I think that's, while, in general, you don't want to interrupt somebody, I think if they are really starting to dominate in that way, I think that can be a way to help navigate. And I think just framing it that, you're not trying to cut them off, but you just want to make sure that you get to cover some of these other topics. Yeah, and then there's the question, who initiates the platform to do a one-on-one meeting? Would you have something set up already and send it to the other person? So yeah, I think there's a few different approaches there. So one is to send somebody an email and ask if they would be open to meeting. I would say if it's perhaps a more distant connection, then I think that would be appropriate to start. If it's somebody that you're going to be working with, and it's pretty reasonable that you'll be engaging with them, or if it's you have any question between the two, I think putting something on the calendar can be useful, because not everybody checks all of their email, and it just helps force the discussion. They might decline it, but there's also a good chance that they'll accept it, and then you have it set up and ready to go. And then with regard to the comment about a platform, there are, of course, some more dedicated networking events. So for example, there's some data science conferences that I attend, and they actually set up some networking sessions, and they found all these interesting ways where you could read someone's profile and then you could request a networking meeting with them at a specific time slot. So I think that's another way to just keep a lookout for those types of opportunities. And then last one I would mention, perhaps with LinkedIn, is if you do want to connect with somebody there, I think when you request a connection, you can add a note. I think that's important if you're looking to network with this person. So add some details there about what struck you about their work, or what you would want to learn from them, so you can give a little bit more details about what you want to get out of that engagement. I think that more thoughtful reach out will definitely leads to greater results. I think if you're ever reaching out to somebody on LinkedIn, adding a note, it's definitely going to be a higher chance than if it's just a blank request. And I have another post on our Data Science at Microsoft blog on that Medium link that I shared earlier, and we'll put at the end. It's about mentoring, which is kind of related to that too, how to reach out. And so that also discusses, types of folks you could reach out to give some ideas, as well as methods to reach out. Okay, someone asked, what is a good time frame? 10 minutes, 30 minutes? Yeah, that's a good question. I think it does vary depending on the person and perhaps the content that you're covering. I would say 30 minutes is probably a good general estimate. Sometimes people even do 25 to allow a little bit of time between meetings these days. So I think that's a good default. I think that especially if it's an initial meeting, I would start with that rather than anything longer. And then you could always have a later session if the conversation is just really flowing. And, often the other person will actually say, hey, I'd be happy to chat again later or another time. Thanks for reaching out, for example. Let's see. As far as like the shorter one, there are some scenarios if it's, an executive, for example, who might have tens of thousands of people in their division where, yeah, even 10 or 15 minutes with that person can be very valuable. And so there are some cases where it might be shorter. And in that case, you might reach out after you've perhaps had some initial interaction, and then you could follow up on that to say, like, hey, it was great to discuss this topic with you. I'd love to follow up. And on that mentoring post, I also mentioned some aspects around, when you reach out, having an agenda, being respectful of that person's time, doing your homework, looking at whatever you could have learned online. So if you want to learn about their team and there's a bunch of content already available, perhaps on your internal website, or they've given presentations, or you could ask somebody else that you know within their group to get some context. That's always great, rather than going in and blankly just asking, hey, what does your group do? You want to make good, efficient use of that person's time and ask insightful questions, or ask, deeper, more thoughtful questions. And then following up is key as well. So, let them know that the time they spent with you was, had some value. I think that's pretty fulfilling for us all. We want to know that we're having some impact with whatever we engage in. And so, sharing whether it's the next week or the next month, as you went and implemented or acted on some of the things that they shared, whether that was mentoring, advice, or if it was more of a networking discussion where they let you know about a book or a contact, sending them a quick follow-up mail and saying, hey, I got to check that out, and here's some things I learned from it, for example. What is the best way for students to connect with senior employees is another question that I see here. So I'm assuming that student is, not currently working at that company. So one thing that I've been doing within our group that might be available through your university is this concept of capstone projects. So I find that to be a really interesting experience. I know for me as a student, I always really enjoyed my summer internships because that was really the best opportunity to get a sense of, from what I was studying, what is that going to really look like in the enterprise or academia in the future. And so these capstone projects, I think a lot of these universities are starting to have enterprise sponsors come in and sponsor a project with students. So that's a great opportunity if you have anything like that available. We've done it with MBA programs and data science master's and PhD programs. So I know a number of those have that available. The other way would be internships, as I mentioned. And then I think there are, more and more mentoring programs as well. Microsoft has one that's started up. So those are a few ideas on that topic. Okay, there's one about how do you encourage folks with people conversations anxious around people? Yeah, I think that one might have come in perhaps before we did this current slide here. And so, I think the visualizing, the finding the common ground, having that elevator pitch practiced, a few of the different relaxation ideas, I think those would be relevant for that question. Okay, I think I'll take one more and then we'll keep going with the content and then come back. Okay. Sometimes people book meetings for 15 minutes or say half an hour and go on and on for 2 hours. Yeah, I can definitely see where that happens. I think that it's pretty understandable that people would have a next meeting at the next hour, and so you could, if you see that it might be headed that direction, you could start the meeting and let folks know respectfully, I have a hard stop at this time. If you see during the discussion that that's going on, you can also bring that up mid-meeting. Perhaps with the other comment that came earlier about if someone's talking a lot, how do you interject? That's an example where you could say, hey, it looks like we just have 10 minutes left and I want to make sure we get to cover this topic. But I think there's a lot of ways that you could respectfully end the meeting on time. So I don't think you have to feel obliged to go on. And then there's another question about how much time did you spend on networking on average per week in pre-corona time? So yeah, that's a great question. And it's a little bit hard to measure in that way because like I mentioned, there's a lot of networking interactions that I'm doing as part of other meetings or other engagements, activities that are already set up. So I probably wouldn't count those hours because those are, already, I would say, accounted for. As far as the networking time, we'll actually get to this a little bit later. It's not really the time or the number of connections that matter. You kind of want to think about the bottom of that funnel in terms of how many of them end up continuing as you go along. So in this book that we'll discuss, they talk about how an extrovert might go to an event and they might get 30 business cards. An introvert might get 3. However, a month or 2 later, perhaps from those 300, the extrovert only has 3 people that they're really connecting with. And perhaps the introvert who started with 3, actually all 3 of those continue to be, strong connections. So it's really that bottom of the funnel that you want to think about, the quality over the quantity. But I would say if I reflected, it would be somewhere around probably 30 minutes to an hour per week. And, that can vary. I think that there's a balance here. Like I often think about, I find there's a lot of value from these opportunities to broaden horizons. But I also need to cover my responsibilities first. So you don't want to get too distracted. I think there is a scenario where you could go too far. I heard another talk where someone was talking about, it was a discussion on founders and that there's a lot of different events that go on in the community and you might get distracted by that and, not doing as much on your core job. So I think there is a balance. You want to cover your core responsibilities. That's a priority, and then find ways to build this in. But I think it is we discussed all the different ways and approaches you can do it. I think it is feasible, and I do find that the time that I invest in it definitely overall has had a positive ROI in that sense. All right, so let's keep moving forward here. Yeah, so further on the feeling more natural networking, so there was the misconception around things feeling contrived. So these are a lot of things that help me when I go into a networking discussion. So again, it doesn't feel like I'm bothering somebody for their time or, doing something that's self-serving. I think focusing on learning is a big one. I think, with the Carol Dweck mindset book, this mindset of continuous learning and improvement, and this is just a way that I can learn more about other people, other paths, other areas. I talked about identifying the common interests. I think that helps everything flow further as well. Thinking about what you can give is a huge way to just flip this around. So when you go and you meet with this person, a new contact, think about what you can contribute to them. And, even if they are perhaps more senior than you in an organization, there's often, connections that you can make, context you can share about your work or prior experiences you've had. So I think those are pretty frequent as well. And it's one of the things I've included also in that article about mentoring, about why to be a mentor. Let's see, the finding a higher purpose. So I think thinking about what you can do together with this person. So that's another way to, again, make it feel less self-serving. You're really thinking about how can I work with somebody in this other part of the organization, and together, what are we going to be able to produce together by having shared context on each other's groups and having a collaborative project together, for example. And then, yeah, I think also just a comment to think about, investing in showing up in your current job. We talked about all the different experiences you can have in your current job. And I think, people see and notice how you show up in your current environments, and that can help recommend you for other opportunities as well. So this is the book that I've referenced a few times by Deborah Zach, and it really focuses on networking for introverts. So let's get into some of the topics here. So to kick off, this is some general descriptions about how to classify an introvert versus an extrovert, and a few attributes that you see of both. And another great book on introvert, I would say, is Quiet by Susan Cain. It's a really insightful book. I think leads to great appreciation for different introvert approaches as well. And so for introvert, and I think this can be helpful for, it's just a broad spectrum, so we're all kind of somewhere on this line. A few additional tips that she mentions that are helpful for networking, and she uses these 3 Ps. So first is to pause. So before you get into that discussion, I talked about some of the preparation. For example, what's the research that you can do? What's the homework going into that meeting to lead to a successful discussion? Having a list of questions is great. Of course, you want to be able to improvise as you go and new ideas and topics come up, but having a list to be able to go back to ensures that you're going to be able to make efficient use of the time, and also ensures, it helps with the anxiety question earlier. I think if you already have a list there, you don't need to get nervous about there being awkward pauses. You have something you can go to. So process. So this is having a deeper conversation. So rather than a lot of the initial small talk, you might more quickly get into a deeper topic, and I think that's really where you're going to feel the connection to the other person. We talked about asking open-ended questions to lead in there. Yeah, and she had this concept on why, using how or why, just why could sometimes have a judgmental tone to it. Why did you decide to do it this way? I don't know. I think you could kind of, through your tone, phrase that so it can work in different ways. But I think just that way of, like we discussed, asking questions that aren't going to end in a yes or no are helpful here. And then pace. So this question came up before, how many hours should you spend on this? How much time? And so, I love this comment she said about how, a drained introvert is an ineffective introvert. So this is a really personal thing. You want the quality of the interactions to be high, and people are going to want to engage with you more if you're an engaging person. It's hard to do that if you're depleted or overwhelmed. And so I think just checking in with yourself, and so she recommends creating a schedule that suits your style and your comfort, but just keeping it going. And so I think, like anything, just starting doing one is a great way to get through that barrier, and then it will more naturally follow. Okay, so just to recap some of her points here, leverage your strengths. I think that's just something that's general. I think generally helpful in the types of things you engage in. I think, of course, we want to work on areas that are challenging or could be growth areas, but I think leveraging your strengths, you'll definitely have accelerated progress. So we talked about how the extrovert might like to have a lot of different connections and outreach, and the introvert might prefer a few of those deeper ones. So just use whichever one is more natural to you. So that also leads to this phrase she uses around connecting over collecting. So it's about the deep connections, the bottom of that funnel around, rather than just the number of business cards that you would collect, or emails, or whatever the right term is these days, LinkedIn connections perhaps. Yeah, quality over quantity, etc. So I think we've covered each of these points. And then, yeah, just to close here before we go into questions, I love this quote that she had about life is one giant networking opportunity. And so literally every interaction that we have is an opportunity for networking. There's, we can learn from anybody. There's no rank. We all have different approaches, styles, and things that we can appreciate around what others are doing. And yeah, so I think just kind of using that mindset is a really healthy one. Here are the different places to stay connected. And I saw there was one question about the book club post, so I'll go ahead and put a direct link in there. I think in LinkedIn you have to kind of look under the articles.
Hey Lisa, I found it. So I added it in.
Oh, awesome. Thank you so much. There's another really good question that came up here. What's the best way to reach out to someone you haven't spoken to in a while? And so this can come up with the prior coworkers, the classmates, for example. The first thing I would say is it's actually good to try to create a situation where you're not getting into that environment. So I think, thinking about your network like a garden that you're continuing to water, and you're nurturing this network. This, it might sound initially like a lot of work, but it actually doesn't take that much time. So just checking in with people periodically here and there, whether it's around holidays, around job change, birthday, whatever the event is. And that's a nice way so that you're not just coming to these people when you need something. There's more of a foundation there. So that's just one approach. And then, yeah, of course, you can't do that with every single person in your network. So let's say there is somebody who you haven't reached out to in a while. I think that, just having that thoughtful outreach can go a long way. So let's see, there was someone who I reached out to in the past couple of years who I hadn't spoken to for maybe 10. And, just kind of filling in what's happened during that time, sharing some thoughts around what I wanted to talk to them about. And, and they took the phone call and were able to catch up and kind of continue the conversation. So yeah, I think some general advice there. So as far as some mistakes a student can make in networking, I think that just like we said, that we don't want it to feel too self-serving to ourselves. Let's also not make it feel that way to the other person. I think, asking in a way that's really focused on your learning and what you want to collaborate on together, I think can just be a natural way to reach out than, someone you haven't heard from in 10 years and haven't worked with at all, and then just asks you to recommend them for a job position. I found that's kind of hard for me to do because I don't really have context on their work together. But I think, if they reach out and they say, hey, these are some things I've been studying, here's what I'm interested in, do you think I could learn more from you about this position? Let me know if you think I'm a good candidate. Like, that just feels a lot more natural than the first one. Yeah, and I don't want to kind of say that you need to be very reserved or not open in your interest. I think you can share that, but just like anything, doing it tactfully. There's another question. I feel that building trust is so hard, and once built, it is so easy to break forever. It will never be replaced in other person's eyes. Yeah, that's true. They say that trust is something you build over time or years that you can break in a moment. Yeah, so I think that kind of comes back to just finding a schedule that works for you and thinking about how you show up in your work today, doing the rest, your self-care, so that you can make good decisions in those moments. All right, let me move forward to just the next slides here, and then we'll see as we get to the end if we have time for maybe one or two more questions. There was a question about how to stay connected, so Rebecca put the LinkedIn link there, so feel free to shoot me any additional questions there after the session too. I did want to share there's a few upcoming events that I'll be doing through the reactor. One is around career paths into management versus individual contributor. That's a common question that I receive, and a common, I think, decision that people make at some point in their career. And so talk about ways to make that decision and ways to prepare yourself. And then if you do decide to go down that path, how to be successful as you onboard. The next session is about data science in the enterprise and just a number of applied learnings that we find when applying these modeling and analytics and inference approaches in a commercial product. And then finally, a women in tech topic. And so, Rebecca, I'll turn it over to you if there's additional closing words you want to add, and then we can see if we have time for maybe one or two questions in the end.
Thank you so much, Lisa. I'm just going to quickly share my screen if that's all right. Just to cover a couple of slides here on my end for the reactor. I happen to have the slide basically just reiterating what Lisa just stated. We have her featured with us again in February. She's doing a 4-part series with one session a month covering a variety of topics. So certainly if you joined us through Meetup, you can find these events listed there, February 3rd, March 10th, April 12th for these different topics. So feel free to check them out, sign up. Again, someone asked they came late to the session. So if you missed it or you came late and there's something that you wanted to see, we will have this recording on our YouTube channel probably in just a few days. It takes a little bit of time to get that up, but you can definitely tune in there. I did drop the LinkedIn for Lisa's contact into the chat as well. So, and also the other, oh, sorry, what was it? It's the medium.com for profile and additional bio info. So definitely check those out if you want to keep connected with Lisa after this session. For the reactor, if you came through from maybe a tweet or you saw the listing on LinkedIn, you're not yet part of our community, definitely consider it. We have our main website, which is microsoftreactor.com, which has all of the different regional events. We are an international community-based program. All of our events are free. We bring speakers in from Microsoft, outside of Microsoft, experts in the technological field. A lot of our sessions are focused on technology, developer, but we do have business and career development events every once in a while as well. So think about joining through there. We also have localized meetups in a few different areas around the world. Right now, everything is virtual. So even if you don't necessarily live, for instance, in New York, where I'm speaking to you from, you could definitely still tune in. Right now, everything is on a virtual platform. So if it works with you and your timing, time zone, definitely consider signing up to one of our meetup page groups that works best for you. And tune in for future. We have every week new and interesting content being broadcast. And then finally, I think if you have time, please feel free to, I'll drop this survey link into the chat, but if you have the opportunity, we really do appreciate you taking the time and letting us know your feedback so we can provide future content that's relevant to you and what you're hoping as the community to gain from the Microsoft Reactor programming. At this time, I'm going to circle back to Lisa. There are a few, I think, other questions that may have come in.
It looks like we have 3 minutes, so I'll just do a quick lightning round. One person asked, is it rude to share your calendar and ask for a 15-minute meeting? No, I don't think that is rude. I think you can absolutely do that. And I think the main thing is just being flexible. I think, if you're asking for somebody's time, you can ask them like, hey, here, would you prefer that I book the meeting? What duration do you prefer? What time frame? Is this a good month? So, I think just being flexible to what they choose, and I recommend that for mentoring as well. There was another one about what's the best networking advice that personally helped me. Really, I think it's just to do it. I think there's been, moments where I wasn't sure, should I reach out? And it's always been so valuable, and have been, pleasantly surprised in terms of how willing and engaged folks are. And yeah, I think it's not going to be 100%, especially, it is a pretty busy time. So I think that's understandable. I don't think, don't take that personally, just try the next one. So yeah, I think the main one would be just to go ahead and do it. Does networking differ in the US and Europe? I would say it is worthwhile to consider different cultural approaches. I've seen even just language, communication, we might make different assumptions. So it's a good question. I would love to learn more actually about some of those specific interactions of folks, in, obviously my primary experience has been in the US, although I have had, some engagements through different events in different countries. So I've overall found it's the same, but would love to hear if anyone from those geographies has observed anything different there from what we discussed today. And then the last one I'll kick off was, there was one about events, and Rebecca already answered that too, about how to create those, buffet line conversations. We talked about it a little bit earlier in the talk too. I would say that's kind of one of the challenges during this time. So I mentioned a few things that we've tried from the virtual reality. That's the closest that I saw to create those spontaneous run-ins. But yeah, the meetup rooms are helpful. Other kind of LinkedIn reach outs are a new one as well. So I think that is an area that I think we're continuing to navigate, and look forward to seeing more solutions that we come up with there. But I know I've heard from quite a few folks they used to see at conferences, so they definitely miss that part of the interaction. All right, I know we're right here at time, so I'll go ahead and wrap there, and feel free to write me with anything else that comes to mind. But thanks everybody for joining today.
Yes, thank you so much, Lisa. Really appreciate it. This was great. I think there was a lot of insightful information that you discussed today, and I think there's a lot of good takeaways from the session. Thank you all also to the attendees for joining us and taking the time out of your day to come and be a part of this community. If you have additional questions later on, you can message. If you came through on the meetup.com side of things, there is an area on the event page that lets you drop comments. So do feel free to put them there, and we can always try to get some answers to those at a later time. Otherwise, tune in for the next one. Thank you all very much.
Thank you. And good luck with all of your networking. Thanks, Rebecca.